Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of President Donald Trump's peace plan for the war in Gaza. The initial agreement was confirmed by Hamas, Qatari mediators, and the Israelis.
This is a momentous day. It's Thursday, October 9th. Now 2 years and 2 days since Hamas brutally invaded Israel and took our people hostage. It also marks 2 years in the Jewish calendar since they were kidnapped on what was supposed to be the joyous holiday of Simchat Torah. We have hit a critical point in this war. From day one of this war, the Prime Minister laid out 3 objectives: the return of all of our hostages, the defeat and dismantling of Hamas, and ensuring Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. All of the Prime Minister's objectives have now been achieved. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night announced approval of the first phase of the plan for all of our 48 hostages to be released by Hamas terrorists who have held our innocent people for 734 days.
Hamas will be releasing all 20 living hostages this weekend as the Israel army will move out of 70% of Gaza. Negotiators have been meeting in Egypt for days to hash out a Trump-backed peace plan that he hopes will ultimately result in a permanent end to the 2-year war and bring about sustainable peace in the region. Hamas announced the deal leading to the end of the war in Gaza, noting it will see the withdrawal of Israeli troops, aid entry, and a prisoner exchange. After the announcement, we were joined by Ophir Dayan, former officer in the IDF spokesperson unit, for the Israeli reaction to the deal.
I think today is a historic day. Obviously, it's a very happy day because Israel is going to see at least 20 living hostages returning to their families. But at the same time, as we celebrate, we need to keep in mind that there are families who are not going to get their loved ones back. They're going to either get, a body to bury, or, they're going to get bodies of soldiers who fell during the war. So obviously we need to celebrate while being conscious of those families and keep them in mind. At the same time, on the strategic level, I want to say that this is, I think, the best deal that we've seen so far in terms of keeping Israeli interests. And the reason is that it stipulates that Hamas has to forgo its weapons. It has to relinquish control over the Gaza Strip. Obviously, all the hostages are coming back within 72 hours, which is something that we didn't see in the previous agreements that were proposed. So I think this is maybe the only deal so far that was even coming close to meeting the threshold of Israeli security requirements.
And now we'll bring in our correspondent, Adam Zivo, for the latest developments. Adam, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Can you provide a summary of Trump's peace plan and explain what was agreed to yesterday?
Well, it's a 2-phase plan where the first plan includes an immediate ceasefire, as well as the return of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. And in exchange, Israel is slated to release about 1,700 Gazans who have been detained since October 7th, as well as 250 or so Palestinian prisoners who are serving life sentences. So once that exchange is completed, Israel will then withdraw and return most of the control of Gaza to the Palestinian people. And then that should set the stage for phase 2. Now, phase 2 is the trickier part. This is where where Hamas is supposed to disarm and to cede control over the Strip and to set the stage for the takeover of a transitional government, which would be run by a series of technocrats, including representatives from a variety of Arab states who have backed this plan. Now, the exact nature of this transitional government is still to be determined. There are many vagaries here. Some of the documents that have been passed around have suggested that the peace board that would oversee this government would include Tony Blair, which is a bit of an odd choice and has received some pushback from some of the Palestinians or pro-Palestinian voices that I've spoken with recently. And then the idea is that eventually you would have international investment into the reconstruction of Gaza so that it can become a livable, prosperous place eventually, whenever that is.
How quickly will this phase of the Trump peace plan come into effect, do you think?
Well, I mean, assuming that Hamas is negotiating in good faith, the first phase is actually pretty straightforward and, should be implemented within days to weeks, right? So that's not the complicated part. The complicated part is phase two, right? Because although Hamas has agreed to a ceasefire, and although they've agreed to this exchange of hostages and prisoners, they've been very reluctant to give up their weapons and to cede control of the strip. And so they've been trying to position this in a way where they can still retain some of their military capacity. And in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many experts who are working in this field, that would not be a viable solution because a transitional government would, by its very nature, be deeply unstable because you're governing over a place which is war torn, and the transitional government would be composed of people come from all sorts of different stakeholders and interest groups. And in order for any government to govern effectively, you need to have a monopoly of violence in that area. And what that means is that, only the state can enact violence with legitimacy. I mean, that's essentially what policing is in Canada or in any other functional jurisdiction. Sorry, any other functional government. But if you have Hamas retain its weapons, then you don't have that monopoly of violence, which is essential to good governance. And there's this possibility that Hamas could destabilize this transitional government and eventually take control of the strip again. And I just want to mention that back in 2006 and 2007, when Hamas first came into power through the elections that were held in Gaza at that time, they took that power and they used it to immediately kill their political rivals, the Fatah party, right? So they slaughtered hundreds of Fatah members. So we know that Hamas has a history of killing its political rivals. So if we allow them to retain their weapons, there's really not much that will stop them from doing the same thing again, and coming back into power or ruling from behind the curtain by using, threats of force, intimidation, to turn this transitional government into a puppet.
So let me ask you, is there a realistic possibility that this plan will bring long lasting peace to the region then?
It's a good question here, right? And I think that although we've taken a very important step forward, so much of this remains unknown, right? So we've done the first step of the peace deal, but the second step is the more important step, which is getting Hamas to cede control and to disarm itself. And that part is still very tricky. Um, so we'll see. And I think that so much is unknown right now that that it's unclear whether or not this will lead to lasting peace. However, what we do know is that support for Hamas amongst Gazans has been declining over time. So polling data suggests that at the beginning of 2025, about 35% of Gazans approved of Hamas. Now, in more recent summer polling, we saw that only about 20% of Gazans supported Hamas. So they're very unpopular and there has been an increased prevalence of anti-Hamas protests within Gaza. And Hamas has tried to squelch that by torturing and killing political dissidents and opponents within the Strip. But if we see the implementation of this ceasefire deal, that might further constrain Hamas by giving Gazans a sense of hope for a future without them. And so if Hamas continues to lose its political legitimacy and its ability to maneuver in this space and fears the possibility of an uprising or revolution, then we might see phase two implemented, which could lead to a lasting peace.
What has the reaction been to the signing of the peace plan so far? We have a minute and a half.
What I've been seeing online amongst Israelis has been jubilation. Everyone in Israel seems really happy about this because they're getting their hostages back, and the hostages have become this very powerful national symbol, right? People in Israel are very emotionally connected to them. Now, I'm not in Gaza. International reporters generally aren't allowed there. But what I've been seeing from some of the Palestinian influencers and political commentators who I follow, some of which are Gazan, is that there's jubilation in Gaza. Everyone is celebrating because they know that the killing will stop. However, there's been a conspicuous and deafening silence amongst many of the Western pro Palestinian voices who have for 2 years gone on the streets and shouted, ceasefire now, ceasefire now. And now that there is finally a ceasefire, they seem disinterested in it. If anything, they seem almost mad that the war has stopped. And I think that suggests that for some pro-Palestinian protesters in the West, their interest isn't in peace, but rather in martyring the Palestinians on the altar of anti-Western politics.
Hmm. Interesting. Adam, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.